The golden afternoon sun bathed the city park in a warm glow, filtering through the swaying branches of oak and elm trees. Children's laughter rippled through the air, mingling with the soft rustling of leaves and the rhythmic creak of swings. Families gathered on benches. Couples strolled hand in hand, and joggers traced their familiar paths along winding trails. It was a haven of serenity. At least, it was supposed to be. For Naomi Hayes, this park was more than just a place to escape. It was a piece of normalcy she desperately clung to. The long hours, the high-stakes investigations, the unrelenting pressure being an FBI agent often left her drained. But here, with her 6-year-old niece Lily, she could breathe, even if just for a little while. Lily, with her boundless energy and infectious smile, was a bright spot in Naomi's world. She watched as the little girl darted toward the slides, her tiny arms waving excitedly. Naomi smiled, allowing herself to revel in the simple joy of watching Lily play. But then, a shift in the air, subtle yet undeniable, sent a shiver down her spine. A presence. She turned her head slightly and saw him. Officer Eric Marshall stood at the far end of the park, his crisp uniform immaculate, his stance rigid. His gaze was locked on her, unwavering and sharp. Naomi recognized that look. She had seen it too many times before. The scrutinizing eyes of someone who believed they held power over others, someone who decided who belonged and who didn't. Marshall began walking toward her, his boots crunching against a gravel path. His strides were long, purposeful, heavy with an unspoken message. Naomi straightened, her FBI training kicking in instinctively. She wasn't on duty, wasn't in pursuit of a suspect, but her body tensed nonetheless. She had faced criminals, spies, and some of the most dangerous individuals imaginable. Yet, the cold hostility radiating from Marshall felt just as dangerous in a different way. He stopped just feet from her, his presence imposing. "Ma'am," he said, his tone clipped formal, yet laced with something darker, something more insidious. "Is there a reason you're here?" Naomi met his gaze steadily, refusing to let him intimidate her. "I'm here with my niece," she said, keeping her voice calm, even. "Is there a problem, officer?" A sneer tugged at the corner of Marshall's lips, his arms folding over his chest. "Yeah, maybe I do have a problem," he said slowly. "People like you, acting like you own the place." There it was. Naomi had encountered men like him before. Men who wore their authority like armor, wielding it like a weapon against those they deemed unworthy of respect. She felt a familiar burn of anger rise in her chest, but she forced herself to remain composed. Lily returned, her tiny hands clutching a handful of leaves. "Look, Annie, pretty ones," she said, her voice filled with excitement. Naomi smiled at her, gently taking the leaves. "They're beautiful, sweetheart." But Lily's excitement faltered as she noticed Marshall's towering figure. Her small fingers curled around Naomi's arm, sensing the tension that crackled between them. Marshall leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low, pointed whisper. "You think just because you sit here all quiet, you're not causing a disturbance? This isn't your kind of place." Naomi clenched her jaw. She had options: walk away, de-escalate, call him out. But none of them sat right with her. Because this wasn't just about her. It was about Lily. It was about every other person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong, simply because someone in a uniform decided so. So she did what she did best. She stood firm. "We have every right to be here," Naomi said, her voice unwavering, just like everyone else. The challenge in her tone made Marshall's eyes darken. His jaw twitched, his fingers tightening into fists at his sides. "You're out of line," he spat. "Maybe a night in a cell will remind you where you belong." Lily flinched at his words, pressing closer to Naomi's side. Naomi's heart squeezed. Enough was enough. "Officer," she said, her voice still, "you need to step back." But Marshall wasn't listening. He reached out, his hand clamping down on her arm in a calculated display of dominance. Big mistake. In a single fluid motion, Naomi twisted her arm free, stepping back to create distance. Her stance shifted slightly, not aggressive, but prepared, trained. She met Marshall's gaze head on. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice cool and measured. "Don't like it when someone stands up to you?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Marshall's face. And then Naomi reached into her jacket pocket. She pulled out her badge, the gold emblem catching the sunlight, gleaming with undeniable authority. Marshall's breath hitched as the letters FBI burned into his vision. His entire demeanor shifted in an instant. He stammered, stepping back. "I didn't realize you didn't care." Naomi cut him off. "And that's the problem." Silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of realization. Marshall's hands trembled at his sides. His bravado, once unshakable, was crumbling. Naomi took a step closer, her eyes locked onto his. "Your badge doesn't give you the right to treat people this way. And now, you're going to answer for it." Marshall swallowed hard, glancing around the park as if searching for an escape. But there was none. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Naomi stood her ground, the weight of her badge and years of experience pressing into the space between them. Marshall's face had lost its arrogant sneer, replaced by a mask of poorly concealed fear. He had overplayed his hand, and now, for the first time, he realized he had picked the wrong person to intimidate. His gaze darted around the park, as if expecting backup, but none came. The families and joggers who had once been blissfully enjoying their day were now silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. Some had stopped in their tracks. A few pulled out their phones, recording, ensuring that this moment wouldn't be buried or twisted in his favor. Lily pressed closer to Naomi, her small fingers clutching tightly at the fabric of her jacket. Naomi looked down briefly, reassuring her with a gentle touch before shifting her gaze back to Marshall. I was just doing my job," Marshall stammered, the fight draining from his voice. "You don't understand." "No," Naomi said, her voice cutting to the thick air like a blade. "I understand perfectly. You saw me sitting here, minding my business, and you thought you could use your badge to intimidate me." Marshall's jaw clenched. His authority had never been questioned like this before, and it showed in the way his hands flexed at his sides. But there was nothing he could do now. The damage was done. He had revealed his true nature, and the eyes of the public were upon him. "I suggest you walk away, Officer Marshall," Naomi said, her tone even, but the warning was clear. "Before you dig yourself into a hole you can't climb out of." For a moment, it seemed like he might say something else. His lips parted, then closed. With a final glare, he turned on his heel and walked away, his rigid stance betraying his anger. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves. Some nodded at Naomi in silent support. Lily tugged on her aunt's sleeve. "Annie, can we go home?" Naomi nodded. "Yeah, sweetheart. Let's go." But as they walked away, she knew this was far from over. Later that night, Naomi sat by the window of her apartment, staring at the city lights blinking in the distance. Lily was fast asleep in the next room, the confrontation at the park a distant memory for her. But not for Naomi. Her phone buzzed. A message from her FBI colleague, Daniel Reed. "I heard about what happened today. You okay?" Naomi exhaled, running a hand through her curls before typing back. "I'm fine, but Marshall isn't. This isn't the first time he's abused his power. He's just never been caught by the right person before." Daniel's response came quickly. "You're thinking about going after him officially, aren't you?" "Damn right I am. If we don't hold men like him accountable, they keep getting away with it." There was a long pause before Daniel replied. "I'll help you." Naomi smiled slightly. She knew she could count on Daniel. It was time to build a case. The following days were a flurry of research and interviews. Naomi and Daniel began digging into Marshall's record, and what they found was worse than they had expected. Multiple complaints had been filed against him. Excessive force, racial profiling, intimidation. But every single case had been swept under the rug, buried beneath bureaucratic red tape. Naomi knew that if she wanted to expose Marshall, she needed the voices of those he had wronged. She reached out to people in the community, and slowly, stories began to emerge. A young black man stopped and frisked outside his own home. A Latina mother harassed as she waited for her children outside their school. An elderly couple forced to the ground at gunpoint during what Marshall claimed was a routine check. These weren't isolated incidents. This was a pattern of abuse. And now, for the first time, people were willing to speak up. With each testimony, Naomi felt the weight of responsibility pressing heavier on her shoulders. This wasn't just about Marshall anymore. It was about justice. Armed with evidence, Naomi and Daniel took the case to Internal Affairs. They submitted the complaints, the testimonies, and the recordings from the park. The higher-ups couldn't ignore it this time. 2 days later, Marshall was called into the precinct for questioning. Naomi was there when it happened. He walked in, his usual confidence cracked. He saw her standing in the hallway, arms crossed, and for a brief moment, the hostility in his eyes was replaced by something else, fear. "You think you've won?" he sneered, though his voice lacked its usual bite. Naomi tilted her head. "This isn't about winning. It's about justice. Something you never seem to care about." His jaw tightened. "You ruined my career." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You ruined it yourself." And with that, Marshall was led away. Weeks passed. Marshall was suspended, pending further investigation. More people came forward. His history of misconduct unraveled like a thread pulled from a tightly woven lie. Justice wasn't swift, but it was coming. One evening, Naomi sat with Lily at the park once again, the air light, free of the tension that had once lingered there. "Annie," Lily said, swinging her feet from a bench, "you're like a superhero." Naomi chuckled. "Why do you say that, sweetheart?" "Because you stop bad guys, even the ones who pretend to be good." Naomi smiled, pressing a kiss to Lily's forehead. "I just do what's right." As she looked around, watching the people of the community move freely without fear, she knew one thing for certain. She would never stop fighting, because justice wasn't a privilege. It was right, and she would make sure everyone had it.